I hope you can hear me well, and I hope you can see the shared screen. My name is Stefan Tanase, and I will be your host today. So let's get this started. Thank you everyone for joining. As I said, my name is Stefan Tanase. I'm a cyber intelligence expert here with CSIS, and I'm glad to have you all here today to discuss the outlook for cyber threats for the upcoming year. Essentially, what to expect from this new year in cyber. Because the thing is, the cyber threat landscape always changes. We're always facing new threats. We're always facing old threats which reappeared, and cyber criminals and both security researchers need to always adapt in order to tackle each other. So with this in mind, I'd like to say thanks again for joining. Just to tell you a little bit about your hosts today, CSIS. We're a Danish cybersecurity company founded in Copenhagen in 2003. We have more than 70 employees spanning more than 25 different nationalities. We're the proud hosts of the Copenhagen Cybercrime Conference, which in 2022 hopefully will be again a real life event and not a virtual event. And we're a security company that is proud to be credited by the Gartner Group for our actionable and world-known threat intelligence capabilities, but also for our innovative security products, forensics, and incident response capabilities. We do a lot of work in the industry. We cooperate both with public and private partners, and we are proud to be fighting cybercrime for a long while. And while we've been doing this, of course, like I said, the cybercrime landscape and the cyber threat landscape always changes. And the main theme for last year, the main theme for 2021, I think it was the fact that APT and cybercrime were merging. And what I'm trying to say here is that the lines that are defining APTs and cybercrime were getting more and more blurred as the year passed. We were seeing APT groups adopting cybercrime tactics, getting involved in crime as a service platforms, sometimes prioritizing monetization instead of doing the traditional espionage, especially when the APT actor was coming from countries that were under financial sanctions. And I think what was even more important and dangerous than that was the fact that cyber criminals at the same time started adopting APT behavior. There's some cybercrime groups who have been active for many years now, who have been very successful at doing cybercrime during all this time, and have nowadays amassed huge resources that they can now use for instance, getting access to 0 days or getting leverage in targeting the digital supply chain. So all of these changes, cyber criminals becoming more dangerous and APT actors becoming more agile, let's say, has essentially caused a lot of shifts in the threat landscape, and was the main reason, the main driver for the new direction of nation states developing hybrid capabilities and essentially non-standard rules of engagements in order to tackle the growing threat of cybercrime. And I think this essentially brings us to the first prediction, which is the fact that defensive strategies will continue to push the boundaries, will continue to innovate, because in a world in which malicious actors are constantly innovating, the only thing you can do is also to innovate. And what's been happening here lately is that the cyber domain has officially become the fifth domain of battle after the traditional ones, which are land, water, air, and space. So what this means is that nowadays nation states are deploying hybrid and sometimes even purely offensive capabilities, which were before used in tackling cyber espionage operations are now deployed for fighting cyber criminals. This happened because cyber criminals became as dangerous as APT threat actors. Last year, for instance, the Casilla attack showed that a gang of cyber criminals such as R-Evil is capable of exploiting the supply chain and indiscriminately launching ransomware on millions of machines worldwide. So of course, this needs a coordinated answer. And what we've seen was a lot of coordinated operational disruption capabilities being deployed against threat actors. We've seen a lot of coordination in taking down infrastructure from a technical perspective, in which a lot of nation states involved and worked together in order to take down specific botnets. But at the same time, we've seen threat actors being doxed, essentially their information being leaked to media or just published online. And as a last step, of course, delivering the final strike, which is to indict the threat actor, to arrest him, or in cases where this is not possible, to essentially put sanctions over the country that is protecting it. So there's been a lot of developments in, let's say, the defensive strategies that were being used online. On this slide, you can see a screenshot of a reward that was put up by the US Department of State last year that is offering up to $10 million worth of bounty for any kind of information related to malicious cyber operations that are targeting US critical infrastructure. So of course, with all these changes happening around, cyber criminals, they need to be constantly adapting. And this is exactly what they are doing nowadays, and exactly what they will continue to do during the upcoming year. Because of the old saying goes, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Essentially, what we've seen lately was that whenever big botnets such as TrickBot or Emotet are suffering disruption operations, their members are suffering law enforcement arrests. Other botnets such as QBot, for instance, or IcedID, they're always quick to jump on this opportunity and essentially regain the lost market share whenever a big group disappears. The other side of the story is that whenever a big group disappears, unfortunately, if the core members are not arrested, then that group will eventually resurface in one way or another, in different shape or form. But this is essentially what happened with both Emotet and TrickBot last year. They are now both back online. Actually, TrickBot was the ones who helped Emotet reappear at the end of last year, in the middle of November. And essentially what's happening after they reappear, they just become more aggressive and essentially are ramping up their malicious capabilities. So on one hand, it's a good thing that we're keeping the threat actors busy, but on the other hand, we have to realize that if we don't manage to successfully shut them down for good, all of these actions will essentially just make them more dangerous, more aggressive, more adaptable. This brings me to the third point that I want you to think about today, which is that ransomware is also evolving, because what's happening in cybercrime nowadays is that pretty much every threat actor group out there is involved in ransomware operations in one way or another. And the new reality, and this is something that is here to stay, is that data leaks coming from ransomware are going to increase. Pretty much every ransomware group out there is publishing their collections of leaked data in case their victims refuse to pay. And we at CSIS, we constantly track these dark web websites for leaks in order to monitor for the activity and to better understand how the ransomware operators are shifting. And one thing that they're shifting is they're shifting their focus. And essentially what will happen during this year is that first of all, some groups who either retired or shut down will only come back up later, a month or two later, under a different name with a different leak website, but they will resume operations. The other thing that happened because of the increased law enforcement attention that ransomware actors got, a couple of red lines have been created. Nowadays, plenty of groups, and this is a screenshot from the dark side website, are publicly stating that they avoid targeting government sector, they avoid targeting critical infrastructure, and they avoid targeting industries such as the oil and gas industry, right, the energy industry. And the reason they're doing this is not because they are good Samaritans, but the reason they're doing this is essentially the one that we just discussed, which is the fact that they are nowadays receiving increased attention from nation states The capabilities that nation states are deploying are now similar to the capabilities deployed against the cyber espionage threat actors. So for most of these cyber criminals, even law enforcement attention is already enough trouble for them. They don't want to get into more trouble. So this is causing a real shift in the focus of ransomware actors, and it's something that will define the year to come, which is the fact that groups are openly vowing to avoid crossing these freshly established red lines. And what essentially this will mean is that ransomware groups will increase their focus on Europe and on other regions, which are, let's say, causing less retaliation and less headache for the cyber criminals if they were to go after that specific region. At the same time, a very important development that we've seen and that we believe is going to shape the way that this year is going to look like is the ecosystem of initial access brokers, which are essentially threat actors that are involved in actively selling and reselling credentials or other forms of access inside corporate networks on the cyber criminal underground. The reason why this is happening is that the lifespan of the infections with malware is always getting shorter. Organizations are becoming better and better at catching live malware and eliminating it from their networks. So what this means for cyber criminals is that they need to be much quicker in understanding the opportunity that's there, and much quicker in order to take action and deliver the final stage of the attack. And the reality is that most of the threat actors out there are not capable to deliver such a deadly final strike, let's say, whenever they have access to a specific organization. They might not be capable of doing lateral movement, they might not be capable of doing ransomware, but they are capable of doing things such as brute force or to exploit vulnerabilities, in most cases, not 0 days, but sometimes including 0 days. So they are capable of getting access to these organizations, and then they will be very quick to resell that access to more sophisticated groups. Usually the final purpose of this whole story is ransomware. But I think what's going to happen this year is that more cyber espionage groups will also look at the initial access broker markets out there and try to leverage them for cyber espionage purposes. So long story short, definitely an increase in initial access broker activity and essentially threat actors specializing themselves, not trying to do the whole attack at once, and actually relying on others to take the attack further and essentially monetize that initial first access that they got. What we're seeing from a technical perspective when doing digital forensics and incident response types of activities is that forensics, first of all, incident response, but also attribution will be more challenging in the future. And the reason that we're seeing this is because of attackers are increasing their usage of public tools. They're essentially trying to avoid more and more to use custom tools coded by themselves, because these tools, require a lot of resources in order to be developed and to be maintained. And these tools are also very easy to be detected once they are discovered by researchers, and can also be used in order to easily attribute, future attacks based on forensics artifacts that the previous attacks have. So because of this, we're seeing an increase in the usage of malware tools that can resist analysis, that can, make incident response harder, and that generally can confuse attribution. And if we look at the TTPs of threat actors, we're seeing more and more groups trying to adopt fileless attack techniques, in which the malicious code only runs in memory without leaving any kind of trace on the hard drive. So of course, when doing incident response in situations like this, you will end up with not that many forensics artifacts to analyze because of this in-memory presence only. So by the way, a very good advice here for for possible incidents is that in many cases it's not a good idea to reset the machine that you consider to have been infected, but just to disconnect it from the network, because if you do a reset, you essentially lose the chance of analyzing the memory. We're seeing developments that are going to increase this year in terms of cross-platform threats. Attackers are very aware that whenever they get inside an organization, there's both Windows and Linux and maybe other operating systems that they need to target. So what we're seeing is going to increase this year is the more development of cross-platform malware using languages such as Rust, for instance. And of course, a continuance on the reliance of living off the land strategies, essentially using tools that are already present on the targeted systems, but in order to achieve malicious purposes. And also, last but not least, borrowing or using tools that are openly available on the internet, whether this is tools that are open source or tools that have had their source code leaked, and then they are repurposed and rebuilt by other cyber criminals. It's a big story with Cobalt Strike, and Cobalt Strike will have to be something on the mind of every security specialist throughout 2022. There's pretty much no advanced attack out there coming from the cybercrime world, at least, that's not relying on Cobalt Strike in one of the stages. Of course, not all of them do, but I think the most dangerous ones do. And there should be a very big focus on providing detections and trying to identify active Cobalt Strike beacons in every organization, I think, in the upcoming year. Another thing that we look at very closely at the CSIS is mobile malware, because mobile malware was always a thing, but it never really exploded until last year, until the COVID pandemic hit, and essentially both mobile banking, online banking, and online shopping suffered an enormous increase in terms of usage and adoptions from new users. So the trend that we're seeing going to happen in 2022 is essentially the continuation of the explosion of the mobile malware capabilities and families that happened lately. And I'm talking here about mobile malware that is targeting the Android operating system, malware families such as FluBot, for instance, which became famous for doing a very good job in pushing malicious overlays on the victims' phones that are targeting either online banking platforms, but also cryptocurrency and crypto assets applications such as wallets or trading. We're going to see a continuation in the spread of Android malware through SMS spam. And that's our T-bot. We're very well known to be doing this, and they are continuously testing out and improving their lures, the messages that they send to victims in order to click the malicious link. And we're also seeing in other mobile malware families, such as Joker, for instance, a real push, a real drive from the cyber criminal side to make this malware available on the official app stores of the Android ecosystem, not just to be delivered via third-party websites such as the other examples. So I think we're going to see more malware being available on the Google Play Store, being available on Huawei App Gallery or other Android official stores that are out there. Unfortunately, despite all the good intentions from mobile companies hosting these stores, being able to successfully prevent malware from being available for download in these app stores is definitely challenging. And unfortunately, you know, the biggest problem with malware on Android is that users are installing untrusted applications coming from third-party sources. So usually the best advice is to tell users to avoid these third-party sources and only rely on the official app stores. But the fact that from time to time there's malware available on the app stores, and last year, for instance, there were almost 2,000 samples of the Joker malware that were removed by Google from the Google Play Store. So it's definitely a challenge, like I said, and something that's going to be a real problem in the year to come. Getting to prediction number 7 out of 10 now, and I think it's worth noting, especially that we're talking about threats towards the banking industry, that the Open Banking Initiative and FinTech are going to be places where cyber criminals are going to try to exploit the systems that we are using for our financial operations. What is going to happen here is that the adoption of open banking in more countries, not just in the UK and some European countries, will definitely lead to more opportunities for cyber attacks. And the reason we're saying this is that essentially open banking systems are based on APIs, right? Web-based APIs that are querying each other. Various queries are being performed between financial institutions and third parties. So what this means is that it's very challenging to make sure that the permission that each player in this ecosystem has is the right permissions, and even more than that, and more challenging than that, is how to make sure that these permissions are not going to be abused in case of a cyber attack on a third-party member. Participant. So essentially, it's this is what's causing the problem, the fact that the data can be accessed very quickly, and the financial data of victims will be harder to control. And at the same time, a lot of players in the financial area, especially new fintech type players, will also attract a lot of crime themselves. Mostly because of the fact that they are very new. They are trying to be very quick to adapt, very fast to change and to break things, like the startup culture is. And what this means is that these players, they will lack the resources and the experience to successfully fight financial fraud, and attackers are going to monetize on this. So I think this is an area, these are some areas that are really worth our attention in the upcoming year. Crypto assets are also a big thing in the both real world and also the criminal world, and they will definitely bring more opportunities for criminals as adoption grows in the upcoming years. We're talking essentially here about a global, permissionless, decentralized digital asset ecosystem that attracts both legit users, but also criminal groups. And essentially, everything in crypto is being targeted at this moment. Some groups are very advanced, and they will go for really advanced attacks. But most of the threat actors are going for users who are new in the space, who've just, let's say, bought their first NFT, and they will target these assets with very simple strategies, most of the time social engineering, but unfortunately very successful. We're also seeing groups pushing AdWords and generally fake ads that would redirect users to fake websites whenever they want to go to the real websites. And also, of course, what's been happening before, which is mining botnets, continuing to abuse vulnerabilities. Hot wallets belonging to exchanges or companies involved in the crypto asset space will be more targeted. There's a whole new area of very productive exploits that are happening against smart contracts, where attackers are discovering vulnerabilities in these smart contracts and trying to exploit them. And last but not least, but I think this is the most important point here, is that it's not just cybercrime who is getting involved in trying to exploit the crypto asset space. but also APTs. Like I mentioned, these are advanced persistent threat actors that are coming from usually from countries such as Iran or North Korea, countries which are under financial sanctions. And for these countries, it's part of their strategy to jump on the crypto asset space and try to exploit it and to gain from it as much as possible. So this is going to be an interesting area to watch for new and sophisticated attacks throughout the next year. Speaking of sophisticated, we need to talk a little bit about supply chain attacks. Because supply chain attacks were always happening, but what's happening right now is that they are becoming the new normal. Already last year, we've had 4 times more supply chain attacks than the year before. And the problem here is that not only the sheer number of these attacks, but the fact that more and more of these supply chain compromises are happening because of abuse generated by cyber criminals. So like I mentioned in the beginning of the session, we have groups such as REvil who are capable of exploiting a supply chain attack of an MSP as big as Cassia, and to indiscriminately push ransomware to millions of endpoints around the world. So as you can see, these attacks create a lot of noise and they create a lot of destruction. Traditionally, the supply chain has been abused by threat actors involved in cyber espionage, and these threat actors are usually more subtle. They definitely don't generate noise. They don't want to be seen or heard, and they don't want to cause trouble. So the problem is when capabilities such as abusing our supply chains are getting into the hands of cyber criminals. Another aspect that's worth mentioning here is that the more supply chain attacks we're going to witness, the more challenging it will be for incident response teams around the world to do incident response. Because doing incident response is a very time and resource consuming activity. And whenever a supply chain attack happens, it means that multiple organizations around the world are all victims of the same threat at the same time, which essentially causes a sort of a DDoS attack against incident response teams worldwide because they are all busy at the same time. And this is a moment in which incident response retainers are starting to make a lot of sense, because you want to make sure that you can get the right help at the right time whenever such an attack hits. The last point I wanted to make today is that in the upcoming year, zero-day vulnerabilities will require a serious debate from our side, pretty much from everyone involved in the digital space, but also in spaces such as human rights, for instance. The reason for this is that we've already seen last year in 2021 more than 2 times more in the wild zero-day vulnerabilities which were identified compared to the year before, to 2020, which means that the market for 0 days is pretty much out of control because of the increasing financial incentives that researchers developing 0 days are getting to in order not to publish this 0 days in a responsible manner. They will always be incentivized to sell to the highest bidder. And even though the bug bounty market is evolving, which is trying to offer a, let's say, a positive alternative to how you can disclose a vulnerability and still get rewarded for that. Of course, the bug bounties cannot keep up with the financial incentives coming from the exploit brokers. And the problem with exploit brokers is that it's been clear since the NSO scandal with the Pegasus malware that happened last year that there's a real problem with them because of the lack of market regulation out there. Pretty much everyone can sell anything to anyone. And this essentially is starting to have a global impact because of various countries which have doubtful histories regarding, for instance, the respect for basic human rights, are starting to get access to zero-day capabilities, to zero-click exploits that can essentially get root access on a latest generation iPhone. it's really a moment in which we need to have a serious debate about this and to try to find the right solutions to incentivize the ethical and responsible research and disclosure of such vulnerabilities rather than creating exploits and then having these exploits ending up in the wrong hands. So with this in mind, I think this is the last idea, but probably the most important one that I wanted to leave you with for the upcoming year. The last thing I want to mention before we end is that we started putting together our next threat matrix report, which is going to release to be released sometime in the near future. This is our must-read publication coming out from our experts and analysts. We're putting it out every 6 months. And I really want to encourage you, if you haven't read the previous ones, to go to our website and to make sure to go through them, because they will give you a very detailed description of how the threat landscape is evolving. And essentially to direct you to our resources online, which is our website, csis.com, but also to encourage you to follow us on social media. We're very active on LinkedIn and Twitter, for instance. And on our website, we're gonna find the previous threat matrix reports and also the previous recordings of these webinars. So with this in mind, I'd like to say thank you for being here with us this morning. And if you have any questions, so I see a very good question coming from Jens. I'm going to read it. What is your expectation on the malicious use of vulnerabilities in OS libraries such as Log4Shell? So that's a very good thing that Log4Shell is still on everyone's mind. I think it was the last vulnerability that people were worrying in at the end of last year, and it's something that in terms of reacting to it and patching to it and hunting for shells that were essentially put there by Log4j being abused. It's something that continued throughout the holidays and something that also continued throughout January this year. I think right now the exploiting for Log4j is starting to cool down a little bit. Of course, it will go on pretty much forever, because non-sophisticated threats such as cryptocurrency mining botnets will always try to exploit vulnerabilities wherever they can in order to push their malicious payloads. But I don't think we're going to see, if January passes and we don't see anything significant in terms of Log4j attacks, I don't think it's going to be a big problem going further. Usually enterprises who are big enough in order to be a problem if they are hit, I think they took very good action in terms of mitigating the Log4j vulnerabilities. So unless other exploits show up, I think we're gonna be good in this area. It was a vulnerability that was very easy to be exploited, but at the same time very visible if you're going to do that. So I think this is why a lot of the sophisticated threat actors out there, such as the advanced persistent threat actors, they avoided using Log4j that much. We've seen APTs using it at the end of last year, but only, let's say, less sophisticated APTs that are at the same level with pretty much other cyber criminals actors out there. So it's of course going to be a tool that is going to stay in every threat actor's arsenal, but I think the let's say the whatever was hot in terms of this vulnerability is passing, and if we manage to get to February, I think everything will be pretty much okay going forward. And Jens is having a good point about the grumpy dev of Color.js and Faker.js who showed the downsides of OS libs. And that's true. It's like I mentioned, these are essentially can be defined as supply chain attacks because you're essentially using libraries from sources where you don't control what's being delivered from there. And there's been a lot of these attacks on Node.js, for instance, and it's gonna continue during next year. because it's pretty much easy to either inject code in some of these libraries, or to, in more advanced cases, take over an already existing developer's account and push malicious code through that trusted channel. Another question from Niels. Should we avoid software helps like Lenovo system update? What are your thoughts about malware spread from updates from ABB, Siemens, and other PLC suppliers? So this is an interesting question. So I'm not familiar with the Lenovo system update, if this is a scam or a legit application. But what I would generally say here is that updates is, of course, very important. Sometimes even the most important thing. Every organizations need to apply the updates as soon as possible. Of course, users who are not experienced, they might fall for a fake update kind of scams. Criminals abusing the fact that we are telling the users to always install updates, and there's a lot of attacks out there, both in the mobile space and the Windows space, in which malware is essentially disguising itself as an update in order to trick the victims. About PLC suppliers, I think the threat is very overlooked in this area, because usually industrial control systems are sitting in a air-gapped, ideally air-gapped part of the network. So because of there's no external access to these networks, sometimes the operators of these networks are reluctant to install the latest updates. And of course, installing the latest firmware updates also requires a lot of testing and maybe some downtime. So I think this is an area in which updates is still lacking. But fortunately, because of the other security measures put in place, it's harder for any attacker to get there. But of course, not impossible. I hope this answers your question. I see there's no other questions right now, so I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you once again for being here with us for this year's first webinar. And I wish you a safe 2022 going ahead. And make sure to follow us on social media and check out our presence there, because this webinar, together with the other public webinars that we're doing, are going to be uploaded on our YouTube channel. So make sure to keep an eye for that. And have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.